Okay guys, we're going to go and do Lilith in Torment 4. So we've got our Elixir Advantages 2 on for the attack speed and lucky hit chance. So we're going to go in, we're going to spawn her, we're going to place our Hydras down, and we're going to go straight in on her, all in, and hopefully nuke her down as much as we can. We haven't quite, she jumps in the air quite fast now, so we didn't quite get her done, but we have basically killed her. So now we've just got to play one set of mechanics here. So they will come down on us, and as you can see, everything's just getting dealt with. So we'll just run over to the edge here, and that's her stage 1 done. So now that's the case, we can come stand over here in preparation for stage 2. She'll spawn around here. So we can place down our Hydras in preparation, although we're going to keep casting them anyway when she spawns. And the idea is to crowd control her before she even gets a chance to do anything. And if we're really lucky, it will bug out her ghost, so we won't have to deal with those. So you can see we crowd control her immediately. She burns down pretty much immediately. At this point, we can stop attacking her and just get ready for whatever's coming our way. So in this case, we didn't bug out the ghosts. We do have those to deal with. She'll go down. She'll come up the middle up here. And we're going to get ready to run around and avoid the ghosts and avoid these platforms. And we're just going to rotate around here. I'm going to keep rotating around and wait for the second stage. So we come to this platform up here. Come back down around this way. And then we're just going to get ready for stage 3. We don't want to get on that platform too early, otherwise we're going to end up being on there for too long. We'll end up avoiding these ghosts for far too long. And get off there, we'll come back over here. Use teleport to get out of the way if needed. And then you can just place down your Hydras and finish her off. Although we did just get a crowd control there, so that's interesting. Interesting to see what happens here. She should just die. There we go. And there you go, she's dead. Hey guys, so during Season 5 I put out a Burning Hydra Sorcerer build. So I decided in the PCI I was going to try the Hydra out again and see how it was going to perform in the upcoming Season 6 as things currently stand. And I'm pleased to be able to say that it does seem to be performing a bit better than it did in Season 5. It absolutely was fine in Season 5. And I enjoyed it very much, and some people took it further and improved it with the likes of winter glasses and various other mechanics, so hats off to them. People like Roxy and Lurkin and such. So I've gone back to the drawing boards, especially thank you to the community for all of the comments as well, and we've tried to incorporate some of the new mechanics and items that are available to us to bring something that fills some of the gaps that the build had during Season 5, namely pushing pits and generally just AoE in general. So with that in mind, I am welcome to be able to and glad to be able to bring to you the Perdition Hydra build. So we'll go through the skills first, and then we'll move on to the enchantments, the Paragon, and then the gear. So skills, we're just taking 2 points here in Firebolt. It really doesn't matter where these points are, to be honest, you just have to take 2 points here. I was hoping they'd change this at some point, but they haven't so far, so that's where they've gone. We have got 1 point in Frozen Orb, we've got 1 point in Enhanced Frozen Orb, and that's mainly just so that we can get 1 point in Greater Frozen Orb. This is how we're going to be making enemies vulnerable pretty much all the time, so that's super handy. And then, to be honest, there's nowhere really useful for the rest of the points to go, so we've just slapped 1 point in Potent Ward here, just so that we can get down to our defensive skill tree. So we've then taken 1 point in Teleport. I've not taken a point in Enhanced Teleport or Shimmering Teleport. You absolutely could take points out and put them there. The reason I haven't taken them is because you've got so much movement speed on this build anyway, you don't need it. And I really don't like relying on Shimmering Teleport for damage reduction on this build. Now, this is useful, and it absolutely could be taken, but the build is pretty tanky anyway, as demonstrated in the video. If you did need extra defense, then absolutely take a couple of points out. Maybe take the points out of Dampen Layer here and Energy Focus, and then put them in here instead. So that is completely up to you. So other than that, we've got 1 point in Elemental Attunement, because we've got quite a lot of lucky hit on this build, so we just reset one of our teleports or ice armors every time that's available. 3 points in Glass Cannon for extra damage. And I've currently just put a point in Energy Focus and 1 in Dampen Layer, because they were just leftover points. So that just gives us access to Energy Focus and a bit of extra damage reduction while you've got a barrier up. And we are intending to have a barrier up pretty much all the time. That is where most of our defense comes from. So that then allows us to move down to the Conjuration tree. We max out Hydra because that maxes out the hit damage and the burning damage. We take 1 point in Enhance Hydra, and we take the burning damage node because we do not need crit chance from Invoked Hydra on this build. And this just gives us extra damage. This is particularly amazing when you're leveling up. This does tend to curve off in the very higher end pits where the dot damage just doesn't quite cut it anymore, but it is still there and useful for any other content, and it is still extra damage. So this is where we go. We're going to use the new skill in the Conjuration tree, which I imagine will be used in a lot of builds. We are taking 1 point only in Familiar, because we're not relying on their direct damage to be the main driving of the damage in this build. But we do want access to them because that gives us up to 6 extra conjurations we can have up at one time, and it also means we can then take 1 point in Enhanced Familiar, which you can have up to 6 of these at a time, and as you can see, each time one of them attacks and hits, it applies 705,847 burning damage over 4 seconds. Now that number will scale based on your current stats like intelligence and such, but as you can see, it applies a really significant amount of burning damage. 705,000 relative to Hydra is over 7 times what the Hydras will apply per spit, and that's each attack and it's an AoE effect as well. And you can sometimes end up summoning up a cold and lightning one as well, so it's just application of chill and stuns as well, so they're all very useful. And then we also want to take Invoked Familiar here, so we got 10% increased damage to whichever type of familiar is up. If you have one of each type up, you'll get 10% increased damage to all of them. But the main deal here is to try and have at least one fire one active at all times, so that you end up with the 10x damage, multiplicative damage there. We're then going to take 3 points in Precision Magic because we want all the lucky hit chance we can possibly get on this build. 1 point in Ice Blades, 1 point in Enhanced Ice Blades, 1 point in Summon Ice Blades, just because we want access to Ice Blades here for vulnerable application and the Conjuration summons, and then we just want access to their cooldown reduction mechanics because that's just amazing for helping keep all our cooldowns coming off. We're also going to take 1 point in Lightning Spear, 1 point in Enhanced Lightning Spear, and 1 point in Invoked Lightning Spear. This is mainly, again, so we've got access to the Conjuration, so we can keep scaling up our Conjuration Mastery. You don't need a point in Invoked Lightning Spear, but when we've got 100% crit chance on this build, you just get free stuns here, so this is very useful for stunning bosses and such, on top of your already quite amazing crowd control ability anyway. And as mentioned, we're using Conjuration Mastery, so we've got 7 ranks here with the items and ranks right now, and it stacks up to 30 stacks. I am thinking this might end up getting reduced in before it comes out for Season 6, so you might want to keep an eye out for that. 30 stacks still seems high. They may bring this down further. I think they went at 30 here because they didn't want to go too hard on it too fast, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go that way. If they don't, that's great, but I'm just a bit wary of that. This build will, on average, get to about 20 stacks without the cooldown reduction shrine at the moment with my current build. So I think if they did reduce it, it would be somewhere like 25 or 20 probably, but we'll see. And then we're going to take 1 point in Align the Elements because that just builds up to a really amazing damage reduction amount. If you can keep your barrier up permanently, this doesn't disappear. You can put more points in here if you want it to build up faster if your barriers are breaking. And then we're taking 3 points in Protection because you're just going to be casting cooldowns so often, you're just going to be building barrier here like no tomorrow. We don't take an extra point. We don't take points in Mana Shield because once you've got the Starless Skies on, your mana cost of Hydra is reduced to a point where it will take so many casts to cast this and get the damage reduction activation. You will not be able to keep this up 100% of the time, no matter how fast you're casting it. So it's only useful to us if it's up 100% of the time. So before you've got the Starless Skies on, Mythic Unique Ring, you can absolutely put 3 points in here, and this will give you a lot of tankiness. Your Hydra costs 20 mana. There's 5 casts. You can absolutely do that within 5 seconds. You can absolutely get that working so it doesn't cost you mana, so you never run out of mana. This is what I was running until I had my full setup on. But in the final setup, this is not actually that useful to us. We counter the defense with concentration aspects, which we'll see in the gear in a bit. So after that, we come down to the Mastery tree. We don't take too much down here, but we have maxed out the Inner Flames for the extra Pyromancy damage while healthy, aiming to be healthy all the time here. We're taking all 3 points into Devouring Blaze because we are actually going for a hybrid build here. We are heavily focusing into burn, but we're also heavily focusing into crit and crit damage as a whole, so the whole build is well rounded. And then we've taken just 2 points in Crippling Flames because we ran out of skill points, but we do want points here because it doubles up when you're healthy, and it's just an amazing way of increasing your chances of activating Immobilize on enemies, and this just helps, again, towards your already amazing crowd control ability on bosses. It just pushes it even further. We then moved down to the ultimate skill tree. Originally, when I was leveling up, I did level up with Inferno. This is extremely useful for leveling up, but later down the line, when you've got everything going, all the conjurations just still is better because you can scale your damage there better, and you're casting skills more often, so you're getting protection and so on and so on. So I didn't end up taking Inferno in the final build. But we did take 1 point in Fiery Surge just so that we can get into this tree of fire nodes here. We take all the points in Endless Pyre so that our burning damage is multiplied. They changed this season, so it's now not damage that builds up over time. That is now on the Engulfing Flame aspect, and instead they've now moved some just straight up increased burning damage onto Endless Pyre, and then they moved the second part of Engulfing Flame aspect from current Season 5 onto this node. So if you're on lower end content and you build up an enemy's life all the way up so it's completely filled with burning damage over time, they will just melt super quick because they'll get this really huge extra multiplicative damage here. The reality is, on the very high-end content, you'll never fill up their HP bars with burning dot damage enough to really notice this benefit, but it does help on the sort of like mid to high tier enemies and down below. And then we've taken 3 points in Soulfire because that just helps us make it so that Hydra doesn't cost us any mana to cast, and we get 6% multiplicative damage, which is nice. And if you stand still for 2 seconds, it will build up to 12% multiplicative. So that's quite significant when you're in the mix. You'll see in my pit run, I demonstrate that I do stand still in the middle of them for quite some time and teleport around so that we get the extra bonuses there. And I've just taken 1 point in Warmth for the final build because this just gives us a little bit of health sustain if we do take health damage. Pretty much for every burning enemy, each separate burning enemy, you will get 1% of your maximum life healing. So if you get 5 enemies, that's 5% of your maximum life healing per second. So that's just really nice. You will be aiming to try not to take any health damage at any point, really. But if you do, this just helps you sustain without having to worry about using potions all the time. We're then also going to take 1 point in Permafrost, purely just because we want to get to Hoarfrost. You are aiming to freeze enemies as much as humanly possible, so that gives you an 18x multiplicative damage to frozen enemies, and on bosses this just gives you a straight up 18% multiplicative damage boost, and you get a 9% multiplicative bonus damage to chilled enemies, which you'll be doing with your ice armor a lot of the time. And then we're using elemental synergies here. So this is a new skill node they've added. Actually, both of these are. This one here is you get 3% multiplicative damage for each skill you have equipped of that type. So we don't have many fire nodes on now, so this one here actually is only giving us 3x multiplicative damage. You could potentially take these out and put them elsewhere if you wanted. There isn't really anywhere else that gives you multiplicative damage where we haven't put the points already. But you absolutely could take them out and put them in defensive nodes if you wanted, because you're only going to lose 3x multiplicative fire damage there, and your lightning skills and cold skills will benefit more. But if you were to play all 6 skills with fire, you would end up getting 18% multiplicative damage here. And then Invocation here, it's another new passive they've added, which is just flat cooldown reduction. I imagine a significant, if not all, sorcerer builds will end up using this because it's just added cooldown reduction for free. So we've taken that and maxed that out completely. And I forgot to mention earlier, for the ice armor, we've taken ice armor, we've taken enhanced ice armor, and then we've come into mystical ice armor, just so that we get the extra 15x multiplicative damage to frozen enemies, which as again goes in hand with Hoarfrost. And it constantly chills enemies that are close for 20%, so that procs the 9% multiplicative damage to chilled enemies. If you're finding you're struggling to keep ice armor up, or you need to keep it up more often, you can absolutely take mystical ice armor out and put it in shrimming ice armor, especially before you've got your Starless Skies, so you'll be proccing this 1 second cooldown very, very often, and that will just help you keep it up more of the time for tankiness. And then last but not least, we've got the key passive. So leveling up, I use Combustion pretty much all the way to the end, and you can get to about, I got to about pit 79 and finalized on pit 83 using combustion. The very highest I got was pit 83 on combustion. I hit a wall at 84. I got to the boss, but I couldn't quite finish him in time. I then decided to change to this version of the build, and I've been using it with Enlightenment instead, and I've managed to push to 88, just about to push 89, so it's pushed just a little bit further. And the reason I've taken Enlightenment is a couple of reasons. One, you can stack this up super fast to 100 stacks because you've got all three different elements. You're casting the Hydras constantly, and you're constantly smashing cold and lightning damage skills. So you're going to be getting those 15 stacks pretty much alternated all the time. So you're going to get to 100 super quick. You're getting 25% global multiplicative damage as opposed to just 60% multiplicative burning damage only, and with the extra per unique source. Which is useful because it affects absolutely everything we do. Hit damage, crit damage, burning damage, vulnerable damage, anything. It will just affect anything that goes through any source. And then the attack speed here is useful on the version of the build we're using now, because this helps us get much closer towards the attack speed cap, as I will demonstrate when we get to the gear. And then on top of that, our fire damage will end up being the accumulated value of the fire, lightning, and cold damage we have. So you could absolutely play around with scaling up your non-physical damage, and then you'd get an enormous amount of fire and cold damage in this build, which would help with all your frozen orbs doing damage and all of your hydras doing fire damage, and so on and so on. So it just scales all the damage going on for all your elements. So this is quite nice here. This is what we've chosen here. For the enchantments, I played around with a lot of ideas like usual. I played, for the most part, leveling up with the familiar enchantment, because the familiar enchantment, when you're leveling up, means that every time you cast a conjuration, you've got a 25% chance of that ending up casting a conjuration for you. That is extremely useful. It's here right now. It shows in lightning because the last skill I used was a lightning skill. But if you put that in there, it's 25% chance. So that is very handy while you're leveling up, because you can just go around casting hydras, and as long as you're casting them often enough, you'll get these familiars spawn up, and they'll just go off and attack things for you with an area effect attack. So that gives you the AoE the Hydra doesn't do, and it just gives you an extra bit of oomph without you really having to do anything. It's pretty much a point-and-click build. It's wonderful. It's lovely. When you get very high ends and you've got really good cooldowns, you do not need to have this in your enchantment anymore, because your cooldown on here is going to be so good. It's going to be coming off cooldown so fast that you can just keep casting this, and you can keep all 6 up pretty much all the time of any element. So at that point, you can swap it out for anything you like. And in my case, I swapped it out for Frozen Orb, because we are using the Winter Glass on this build, much to my dismay and disamusement, but it is where I've landed. And Frozen Orbs just mean we've got more application of vulnerable, and it means that we've got more chance of spawning up more conjurations, which then can spawn more Frozen Orbs, and so on and so on. So that's where we've landed there. You could absolutely use Frostbolt if you wanted to put points in there for just permanent chill, but you've got so much of that anyway with your Ice Armor, and the Frozen Orb will apply that. You could put Firebolt in there for extra burning damage, quite a significant amount actually, 31,000. So that is absolutely viable. That might actually be better for damage in the end. If you're trying to push pits, the Frozen Orb might not be necessary, and Firebolt might be better. If you wanted to use an X-Files on this build, you would need to have Firebolt on there, because Hydra's dot damage doesn't really activate the X-Files, but the Firebolt will. You could use Incinerate if you really feel like, but that doesn't seem like a very good option, really. Fireball is the absolute go-to for leveling up anyway, alongside your familiar, because when you're leveling up, this just helps you destroy the screen super quick, so you do not need to worry about having to... They just give you even more AoE. You will blast all the way into Torments with Fireball and Familiar, no problem, and then you can even go into Summer Torments with them. They're that good. As for the first one, you could go for Frost Nova if you wanted. Your conjurations will end up casting Frost Nova everywhere all the time, freezing things. I didn't try it on this build, but I imagine it would work quite well. You could also go Hydra, but it seems a bit wasteful because you need to spend 200 mana. And the endgame build here with the Starless Skies, you'd end up having to cast Hydra so many times you would never keep this up for 12 seconds. And even if you did, it's only a 5-headed Hydra. So it has, if this scaled its heads with the extra heads from your staff, then this would be a lot more worth it. But unfortunately it doesn't, so this doesn't really seem worth it, apart from the extra conjuration stack, which again is probably wasteful compared to what else you can get. You could also use Firewall if you wanted to activate those under the enemy's feet. That would give you 3 activations there. I'm not using Firewall in this build, but you absolutely could for extra burning damage and the extra 25% multiplicative burning damage if they're standing in Firewalls. That could be quite useful. But I've landed on Frozen Orb for now. And that seems to work okay because it just gives us that extra oomph for the Frozen Orbs and the Conjurations, and it mixes well with Winds of Glass. And for the second one, in the end game, it's just Ice Blaze, because as we're casting so many cooldowns so often, we're just aiming to just get as many Ice Blades for free here as possible, which then feeds into our extra cooldown reduction from their attacks, and then that just feeds into our cooldowns coming off quicker so we can cast them again and get more and more. It's just a cycle. So this goes on a lot of builds for that reason. So that's where we landed for enchantments. In terms of gear, there are some builds out there already, namely Roxy's, which has got some bits that are the same. But I played around with just about everything this season in terms of runes, gear, aspects, gems, you name it. Stats. I've played around in the leveling process in the end game, and this is where I've landed so far. This is by no means a final and complete build, and who knows how things are going to end up when it actually comes to release. But this is where I've landed up, and I've managed to push a pit 88, and I've very nearly done an 89. I'm pretty sure I can do an 89. I might even be able to do a 90 if I get a good run. This build will absolutely be capable of a 90 plus pit if you could get even better gear. So let's run through the gear here. So there are some key differences here that will not have happened before. The first one is this helm. You'll be asking, why are we using the Air Edition? Why are we not using the Harlequin's Crest? Why are we not using Andariel's Visage? Good questions. So the Harlequin's Crest is perfectly viable in this build. It gives you an immense amount of cooldown reduction, gives you the damage reduction. That's wonderful. And the armor and the health helps solve your armor for you, and it gives you a bunch of HP. And the extra 4 skills will benefit you across the board. The problem with the Harlequin's Crest is it doesn't really give you much damage. And in the end game, tankiness is not generally your problem. It's getting enough damage to be able to kill the enemies, and particularly the bosses, in time. Now, the boss HP has gotten a lot better this season. The scaling of the enemies before the bosses match up a lot better. That they have done well in. But the bosses in tier 80 plus do start to scale immensely, exponentially every single level. And that is where your hurdle will come. Killing things in time, tankiness generally won't be your first and foremost issue. So I went from Harlequins to Andariel's, because Andariel's solves your attack speed for you, and that gives you loads of life steal, and that gives you loads of gives you the poison explosions, which, since we're stacking some lucky hit, that will explode and do a bunch of extra area effect damage, and that was great. That got me to pit 83, almost pit 84, and I pretty much hit a wall with that without getting any further the rest of the gear. I then had this thought that I would try out this Air of Perdition just for a bit of a laugh, because I saw another streamer trying it out, and it did some crazy mechanics and interactions. So we tried this out, and I got this. I've gone with a 1 GA in crit chance, because I figured if I'm going to wear this, we're going to go for a 100% crit chance. The Andariel's version did not focus on crit at all. It was all to do with the dot damage and just attacking as fast as humanly possible, spawning up the Hydras and stacking up as much dot damage as possible. If you're going to wear this, I was like, we need the crit chance. So we got the GA, we got the triple crits into here, and yeah, lo and behold, you get 54% crit chance from here, which is pretty insane. Same as you can get 54 cooldown in the Harlequin's Crest, you know, and it sort of rivals the insane amounts of attack speed you can get if you get the triple crit in the Andariel's, which goes well into about the 80% or something silly like that. The lucky hit chance here is useful across the board, because that's useful for helping proc the rest of our activations and crowd control effects and Winds of Glass effects. Movement speed's always handy. The core skills here only really affect our Frozen Orbs, but they will be doing a little bit of that extra damage there. But the main thing with this helm, other than the crit chance, is really that you get extra additive damage here, which I don't think affects us too much right now. It'll probably help us against the demon enemies a bit, but that additive damage is pretty small. But the big thing here is it gives you a 60% multiplicative damage increase on a helm, which is actually pretty big. Like, there isn't really that available to us anywhere else, and this just gave a significant damage boost. And this is just solo. If you're playing in multiplayer and you're near your allies and you're killing stuff, you can still you can steal their favor essentially, and it can buff you up to an amount from them as well. So you can be very, very good in a group this build. So we've landed on that, and this really significantly changed the outcome of the build and got me up about 5 to 6 pit levels because of it. I'll come back to the runes in a bit. So next we go on to the chess piece. We're using the Tyrell's Might again. I played around with a whole load of options, but really this is just best in slot if you can get one. You can absolutely get away with just a legendary. You just need to put a damage reduction aspects on there, like ever living or concentration, anything to just replicate the damage reduction this gives you, and then just get as much resistances on it as you can, like all resistances, because this just helps you solve resistances, and it gives you such a large amount of damage reduction, and increasing your max resistances and giving you movement speed. This item is still just exceptional. It's going to be pretty hard to beat this on a lot of builds unless you specifically build around it, but this is exceptional. We'll come back to the runes again in a bit. So if you're going to use anything Lucky Hit base, you're pretty much going to use a Fist of Fate. This is a very, very average Fist of Fate I got from the Goblin and Kyovashad, but it has got at least okay stats across the board, and the aspect wasn't terrible. And it's only 631 item power. I could absolutely get a better one of these. You would absolutely be looking for a greater affix one of these for over 100% lucky hit, so that would just increase the build immensely if you could get that much more extra lucky hit, more frozen orbs, more conjurations, more crowd control, so on and so on. So that's what we'd be looking for there. Moving on to the pants, just some legendaries. We've got intelligence, max life and armor, with a temper of total armor and currently a temper of freeze. You pretty much need armor on this to be able to solve your armor on this build. Once you get into Torment 4, it reduces your armor and resistances pretty significantly. So you need armor somewhere to be able to get to over 1,000 armor, which is the new armor cap. So I've got a double roll in here at the moment, just because I haven't got a greater affix. If you had a greater affix on the armor, you would probably be able to get away with maybe one roll into it, but until I got it to try, I'm not sure. And then we've got the total armor percent as well, just to help us get over the 1,000. You pretty much, you can get some extra armor in the Paragon boards, but I don't think it'd be enough to even remotely completely replace both of these. You might still need both of them in some form. And Lucky Hit Freeze is just excellent on this build. You've got access to all of the different crowd controls here on the Fist of Fate, but Freeze is king because it goes with Hoarfrost and the Ice Armor and so on. Moving on to the boots, this isn't best in slot by any means, it's just the best I found. Ideally, I think I'd want Intelligence. Well, possibly you could go for Intelligence, mana per second movement speed, or Intelligence, maybe Intelligence max life movement speed. I'm not sure, but basically I've landed on maximum life, mana per second and movement speed, which it's worked pretty well for me up till now. It gives me tankiness. The mana per second helps keep your mana infinite. It's quite possible you won't need mana per second on this once you've got your Starless Skies, which is where you'd have Intelligence, max life, movement speed instead. I haven't had a chance to test that because I haven't found a pair of boots to replace these with since I've had the Starless Skies on. But before the Starless Skies, you will need mana per second on your boots, or somewhere at least, just to stop you from running out of mana. And then I've gone for master workings into movement speed here, generally speaking, because it just gives you more movement speed, but they can go anywhere you like. And we've got the Lucky Hit Freeze again, because we just want to stack as much of that as possible. And I've got teleport cooldown reduction here, but you can take any useful secondary here in movements. You can take movement speed, you can take teleport cooldown reduction, or whatever takes your fancy, whatever you find more useful to you. Moving on to the weapon, we're currently using a staff. I have toyed with the idea of using a one-hand and focus for extra aspects, but generally speaking, the staff means we can stack up a double aspects, which can be extremely powerful on a lot of these sorceress builds. Damage over time on the staff, which goes really well with the burn damage. And then we go for intelligence, max life, and then I've currently rolled vulnerable damage on this, but I did originally have damage over time. I've gone more into vulnerable now because I think where we're going for a hybrid build rather than just pure dot damage, the vulnerable damage plays more into affecting every part of damage you do, not just the damage over time. And we've got some pretty good mechanics for scaling the vulnerable damage, like the Shredding Blades aspect, which is on this staff, so that's 70%. We've got 60% in the Frigid Fate legendary notes, so that's already 130. And some of the new glyphs give you extra 20% to vulnerable here, and so on and so on. So you end up getting a huge amount of multiplicative damage on top of that vulnerable you've already got. We've got Hydra damage here. Now, leveling up, this will be better while you're leveling up, because you'll be doing hit damage and the burning damage with Hydra. I haven't got enough tempers left and I don't want to risk it, but I'd probably try and roll vulnerable damage here again for the same reasons mentioned above. It will roll slightly less than half of what Hydra can roll, but once you've thrown in the multiplicative damage you can get on top of it, which is about 1.5 to 1.7 times, so your vulnerable damage would end up about 2.5 to 2.7 times what it was, it will probably end up being slightly stronger than Hydra damage overall, and that will affect all your damage, not just Hydra. And you've got so much conjuration damage in your glyphs now. This is just a fraction of what you've got, and this only affects your Hydra damage, nothing else. And then you absolutely want Hydra heads on this build. I was lucky enough to get the triple crit into heads this time, so you get plus 12. You can either get plus 2 or plus 4 in your original tempers. You absolutely want plus 4 if you can, and that just means you've got more firepower when you cast your Hydras. And then, as I said before, we've got Shredding Blades on here because it just gives you such an amount of extra vulnerable damage. It's extremely good if you're stacking vulnerable damage. And then I've put vulnerable damage gems in here, but you could put crit damage in here if you want. You could also put dot damage. But because we've got so much scaling on vulnerable damage through other means, I've put the vulnerable damage in because that scales higher than any of the other scalers we've got for burning damage or crit. Moving on to the amulet. I tried, actually going back to the weapon, I did run with Creeping Death all the way up to the very end game build. Creeping Death, when you're going full burning damage, is absolutely better than Shredding Blades here. That scales your dot damage across the board on crowd controlled enemies and scales the dot damage against bosses. So I would probably use that while leveling up. But Shredding Blades is what I've landed on in the end game for when I'm pushing pits, super high pit pushes, and gone for the hybrid build. And generally this was stronger once you got everything else in place, like the Air of Perdition, the Starless Skies Ring, and the Tyrells and everything else. Moving on to the amulet. So I did level up with a legendary amulet pretty much all the way up, using Engulfing Flames on there, which scales your burning damage up to, it's doing what Endless Pyre used to do. It would give you 6% multiplicative burning damage up to 30% over a certain amount of time, and then it also would give you extra multiplicative burning damage to enemies that are not healthy, so that's below 85% damage rather than half health, so they buffed that as well. That was particularly good on the amulet until the very end game, where it struggled up to, after the pit 83, you pretty much couldn't go any higher. And I was just running a Conjuration Mastery, non-Greater Affix Conjuration Mastery, Intelligence, and Random Affix Amulet. It was nothing special, and it was non-ancestral, so I could only get 4 Masterworks and 1 Temper. There are probably some very good Legendary Amulets you could put here, which would work better than what I had, and you might be able to push higher. But the Fractured Winds of Glass does play very well here, as demonstrated in builds during Season 5, so I thought I'd give it a go, and it did. It was the easiest thing for me to get hold of, and it has allowed me to land where I have right now. So we've just got this. This is the best one I was able to get in the time I had. I've got about a midway aspect. We've got the maximum roll on Conjuration Mastery, maximum roll on Conjuration cooldowns, and a maximum roll on physicals. It's not bad. And we got the one, we can only master it to 4, so we got the 1 Master Conjuration Mastery ranks. That could go in cooldown as well. In an ideal world, you would get an ancestral one of this with at least 1 greater affix, and you'd probably want that greater affix in the cooldown reductions. But ideally, you'd get greater affix, you'd get a 4GA one of these and the perfect aspects, and it would really, but if I had a 4GA perfect aspect one of these in this season fully masterworked, that would have a very significant impact. That would probably push this build at least 1 pit, maybe 2 pits more, because the amount of damage and cooldown reductions you would get from that, allowing you to push even more conjurations, would be pretty astounding, I reckon. So then we're moving on to our first ring slot. I used the legendary ring all the way up until the very end here. And I had on it the pretty much any aspect that seemed useful for damage. I was using Battle Casters at one point. I tested out Conceited. I tested out Stormswell. I tested out all sorts. And I think I used Battle Casters till near the end because that was generally more consistent once you got the lucky hit going. And on that ring I had Intelligence, Attack Speed, and Lucky Vulnerable before I got a Winter Glass, so that I could have some method of applying Vulnerable to enemies. But you could have any useful stats there to your build. And tempering wise, you'd probably just want cooldown to your ultimate if you're using that, or some other useful temper, such as Hydra damage or vulnerable damage or whatever type of damage you're using. But in the final build, where we move into crit chance, I needed a way of getting attack speed and your crit chance so that we could cap our crit chance, but also make up the attack speed we've lost for not using the Andariels anymore. So this here in comes the Ring of Star Skies. Now I was lucky enough to drop a 2GA one of these, so I've put it on, and getting 2GAs in Season 6 is definitely a viable thing because they will all come with one by default anyway. So 2GA mythics will become the new 1GAs from Season 5. I imagine we'll probably see 2GAs drop a little bit more commonly. So getting an attack speed crit chance one is something that's probably more likely to happen than you would have seen before. And I've got the triple crit into attack speed here, which I was lucky with because that just helps cap out the attack speed as mentioned before. And we've got enough crit chance without needing any other crits in there. And yeah, 50% multiplicative damage. We're always casting a primary resource here when we're casting Hydra, so we're just gaining from that all the time. So this is pretty strong here. Moving on to the other ring slot, it's the Tower of Shards, of course. We're going to be activating all three elements all the time through the use of Teleport, Lightning Spear, and Ice Blaze and Frozen Orb, and then our Hydras. So we're going to have the up to 75% multiplicative damage pretty much all the time. And then all four stats here are useful in some form, but mainly the cooldown reduction, non-physical damage, and lucky hit here are very, very good. This is a very bog standard non-ancestral Tower of Shards we've got here with a pretty decent aspects, but there's room for extra damage here, so that would just play into being able to push the pits further. But it would be pretty hard to replace this due to the sheer level of extra multiplicative damage you can get here. In terms of gems and such, pretty much at the end game you're going to put skulls in all of your jewellery. The only reason you wouldn't put skulls here is for some reason if you've managed to make up your armour using Harlequins. If you wanted to try out the new chest piece, which has got 1+1 to all passives on it, you will need to make up your resistances somewhere, so you would have to put a single resistance on a piece of gear somewhere and put in a single resistance gems here to make it up probably. But that's for another time. So pretty much you're going to put skulls here to help max out your armor. Your Tyrells has already pushed you to help max out your resistances. And then we're going to have two vulnerable gems in our weapon. And we've got two topazes for intelligence, our main stat in our pants. And we've got a new tier of gems here, so they go up to 150 intelligence each, so that's 300 intelligence. And then we're going to use runes in our helm and our chest piece here. So this is specifically for people that own the expansion. If you do not own the expansion, you will want to put in just intelligence gems here. So just put in 4 more topazes of the best you've got. But if you do own the expansion, I have landed on these runes for now. And these seem to work pretty well together. So what I've done is I've got it to a point where they're both active pretty much all the time. And that was what the main aim was here. So our first invocation rune here, the one that our first rune that gains the offering for us for activating our invocation rune, is one where every time you cast a skill with a cooldown, you will gain 50 offering. That is your Yol rune. Now that's good because that means you get 50 offering every time you cast a skill, and you're casting a skill with a cooldown. Cast a skill with a cooldown, and you're casting a skill with a cooldown pretty much all the time. So you're going to be getting 50 offering, spamming that like no tomorrow. And we've attached that with a What rune, which gives you Necromancer's Horrid Decrepify, slowing enemies, reducing their damage, and letting you execute them. What this actually does is it reduces their damage by 20%. It gives you a chance to lucky stun them. It gives you a slow on them. It gives you a chance to lucky execute them. And it only requires 100 offering to activate. And it doesn't have an overpower mechanics. You don't need to worry about having over offering on it. You just want to make sure that you are casting this pretty much every 1 to 1.2 seconds whenever you cast a cooldown. You want to make it that once it's up, it's cast. And the reason for that is it plays into the other sets of runes. So we're using a Zol rune here, which means every time you invoke a power from another class, you will gain 150 offering, quite a lot. But you need to be invoking that other class's power. Now, both runes we're using here are from another class, Barbarian and Necromancer, so they both play into this. So your Necromancer one here, which is going to be cast every 1 to 1.2 seconds, give or take, well, if you cast a cooldown, because it needs that to activate it, will give you 150 offering. You need 500 offering to activate the second rune we've got here, which is what a lot of builds will probably use right now, which is invoking it's the Ohm rune, and that invokes the Barbarian's Enhanced Warcry, increasing your movement speed and damage dealt. What this actually does is, the most importantly, it gives you 25% extra damage for 4 seconds and a bit of extra movement speed. We've got loads of that, but that's always nice. So to keep this up all the time, you would need 500 offering every 4 seconds, or if you're good enough and you're able to get up to 1,000, you can then overcharge it into double duration. I think increased duration it says, but I think it doubles it up. So every time you cast it, the Warcry gets cast, that activates its top rune, that gives you 150. Every time the Necromancer casts, that gives you 150, so that's 300 every time they're both cast. This one's casting every 1 to 1.2 seconds. If that casts 4 times in 4.5 seconds, that's 600. That's more than you need to activate this once. So you basically get to a point where you can have these up pretty much indefinitely all the time. Decrepify is casting constantly. You're applying it to enemies that are close to you. So you just need, the same as if you're a Necromancer, you're just casting in an area around you, quite a large area as well. So these two I found to work really well. You can use the reduced cooldowns one, which I had before, instead of the Necromancer here. You probably want the Barbarian one, but you could have the reduced cooldowns one. The applying crowd control rune, I think I've got them here actually. The knock rune here for inflicting crowd control that isn't slow or chill, that stacks up extremely fast on this build. You could use you could use the Eon rune here for reduce your active cooldowns for 0.25 seconds. Those can work on this build. And then I was playing around with a bunch of others, but those are the ones I played around with and found to work on this build particularly. But these two here I found were the two that synergized well to allow each other to play indefinitely. So they benefit your build, more damage, more defense, loads of crowd control, extra movement speed. It kind of gives you a bit of everything you need, and it allows them to bounce off each other to be up. The uptime of it is up for a pretty large amount of time. There's not going to be much time when you're in the mix of fighting when you haven't got both of these up pretty much, and they don't require a very fumbled way of playing to make it work. You pretty much are just playing the build as you normally would, and the Necromancer, you're just playing your cooldowns. Your Necromancer ability will just auto cast for you, and that then plays into the Warcry, which will just auto cast for you every time that you cast a class skill. So every time this is cast, it will basically come up here, and then when it activates this, it will cast your Warcry for you. So you don't have to do any particular special management of skills and such for these to activate. They just go together really, really well, I found. So that is the gear and the runes. Let's go into the Paragon board here. So I'm not going to go through the Paragon board in complete depth. There will be a planner attached in the description which goes through it in a bit more depth. But basically, I've gone with these 5 boards for now. There are other boards you could use. These are the ones I landed on for now. So you've got your starter board. I've currently got Exploit in here as one of the glyphs because vulnerable damage is good here. I don't know absolutely if this is the best slot for it, but this is where I've landed with it for now. So that seems to work okay there. I've then come up into the fundamental release board here. Actually, one thing to mention in the starter board, they've removed all resistance here and put damage to elites here. So they have made it so it's harder to get resistances in the boards now, specifically to try and make them more important. So you need to bear that in mind. Your glyphs that was scaling your non-physical damage and your resistances, that isn't so easy to do now. So the Elementalist glyph doesn't just go here by default anymore. So this is the new board they've added to Sorcerer, and to me this seems like it's likely to be used on a very significant portion of builds because it's pretty much a bit of everything build, and this will be useful to just about every Sorcerer build going out there. I mean, for starters, you've got your glyph, of course, but your legendary node, every time you apply vulnerable, burning, or critical damage, you gain 10% multiplicative damage up to 30. So pretty much anything you do on any sorcerer build will always scale this up to 30% multiplicative damage. You're going to want that. It's an aspect for free for pretty much all builds in some form or another. And then your clusters here, you've got non-physical damage, you've got vulnerable damage, you've got damage reduction from vulnerable, you've got damage reduction from burning, you've got resistance to elements, damage taken over time, reduction, and you've got damage to burning and damage to elite. These are all just generically useful nodes. You'll probably just want to take all of these eventually when you've got all your Paragon points. And then for a glyph, I've currently got control in here. I keep toying with different glyphs to replace control with, but I keep cycling back around to this one because on this build, this just gives us additive attack damage, multiplicative attack damage, and then a triple multiplicative attack damage at the end, assuming it works correctly, which I think it does, but it's quite hard to tell when the tooltips at the top are not really displaying to us what we should be seeing. So I'm sure they'll fix that soon enough. But again, you can put any glyph you like in here, but on this build, I was looking for more ways to deal more damage. I had reinforced in here for a long time for the damage reduction, scaling the scaling the rare nodes, and then giving us multiplicative all damage at the end of it. But you're basically getting you're getting a bit of additive damage from the rare nodes and the intelligence. You're then getting a damage reduction, and then you're getting a multiplicative all damage activation, which, to be honest, is all lovely and fine, and that would work just fine on this build. You could absolutely put reinforced here instead of control. You probably have slightly less damage overall, but it would give you extra damage reduction. So if you need more damage reduction, you should put reinforced here to start with, probably, because it works really nicely with non-physical and vulnerable damage here, and it's easy to activate. Going from there, I went left here. I took the same board as I took in previous seasons here. Frigid Fate. It's just excellent on pretty much every sorcerer build, because if you're applying vulnerable all the time, which most sorcerer builds will be doing, you can get up to 60x multiplicative damage to vulnerable. I've only got 53 right now. You could absolutely get this to 60. And that it applies to any build, any type of damage to vulnerable enemies. It just scales off of bonus damage to cold. You've also got access to lucky hit nodes here. It's the only board that has it that I've seen. You've got extra damage reduction for vulnerable. They've changed this cluster here, so it's no longer cold resistance anymore. It's non-physical damage, so this makes this a lot more attractive. We've got vulnerable damage here, and then you've got your vulnerable and damage reduction for vulnerable. So these are all very nice. You have got extra life over here if you're interested, but that would be one of the last clusters I go for if I do. I then came, glyph-wise, I've currently got the Enchanted glyph in here. I've placed so many different glyphs in here, I've pretty much gone through the entire Cyclopedia. I've landed on this one because the way the legendary bonuses are working, at least right now, it's not entirely intuitive. Originally, we thought that they would just be separate multipliers that would take your final damage and multiply according to the condition. What it actually seems to be doing, and in this case increasing damage by 20.8%, is it goes to your additive all damage section in your stats panel. So if that's 100, it would then multiply it by 20.8, so it would give you 20.8% all damage, and so on. That's what it actually seems to be doing, at least somewhere along those lines. So if you've got if you take the one that gives you multiplicative close damage, and you've got no additive close damage, and let's say it gives you 24.8% multiplicative close damage, you will end up with 24.8% close damage, because I think you've got a base of 1% they use, just to make sure you don't get any 0% math error. That's what it looks like it's doing right now. I don't know if it's intended to do that, and not all of them seem to be doing that, so they're either just not working or they're not visibly showing it, so we'll see. But that's what it seems to be doing. So I've put this one down here because it gives you an enormous amount of flat, just all damage. Affects anything that's going on. And then you've got the increased damage percent here. And this plays quite nicely with some of the other glyphs. I don't think I've got any of the others in right now that give extra additive all damage. But you can put the others that have got additive all damage in it, like Unleash or Reinforced. And those would further scale your flat all damage by a significant proportion. And I've still got extra nodes I can take here, which will give me an extra 41.2, which will scale up. So this one just gives you an enormous amount of flat damage across the board, and it just seemed, after testing it, it just seemed to be more powerful than the others I put in here for this build. It's just a shame that the additional bonus in the middle gives us max resistances, which we don't really need, because we've already got that with Tyrells. It would be much better if this was something else, to be honest, now that we've got the Tyrell's Might. But this is what we've got. You could absolutely replace this with any other useful glyph. If we're looking through, you could put in Elementalist could go here. Absolutely no problem. That'll scale your non-physical damage. So that will take your fire, your cold, and your lightning damage and multiply that. And you get your 15x multiplicative damage here. I did use this myself for a while. And it also scales the non-physical node here. I did use this for a while, but this just seemed to be more powerful overall when I was using it. But you absolutely could put this one here. This one can scale by putting in more intelligence nodes. I think that's the big difference. So you can, where I can get even more intelligence still, this will just keep scaling. This one you would only want 40 intelligence in, and then that's it. That's all you would ever need. This one here, Eliminator, I think the second additional bonus is working correctly with multiplying, but the second one is scaling your additional elite damage in your stats panel. So unless you've got loads of damage to elites, additive damage, this currently multiplies that. At least that's what it looks like it does, so it's not very strong. I tried it out, it didn't seem to be very good, and scaling with a normal nose doesn't really help us that much in the end game. And there's a few others as well, but this is where I landed. Going into the third board, we are using the Burning Instinct board. Because we're going with a hybrid version in this final version, I am using Destruction here for the crit damage, and we're just going all in on all of the decks here so we can get as much crit damage as possible, and we get the extra multiplicative damage when crit striking and so forth. And then we're coming up getting all the damage reduction, all the armor, extra burning damage, extra damage reduction for burning. You've got two of those clusters up here now. The reduction for burning damage isn't here anymore, it's now crit strike damage instead. And then we take the legendary node as well, so it scales our burning damage. This is exceptional for leveling up. It curves off a little bit in the end game, but it still helps us out anyway. You could use the other fireboard if you wanted to, but to be honest, it's completely preference to whether you want to be able to do more direct damage or more burning damage. And you'll be sacrificing having this excellent node here for the dexterity, and you'd be sacrificing the ability to get as much damage reduction from burning enemies if you go for the other board. The other board's more offensive, this one's more defensive. So, and you'd lose your damage reduction from elites in this board as well, which is pretty useful on the bosses in the high end bits. So I do think this board is better overall in general, but it's completely your preference. And then finally, we're coming into the Elemental Summoner board, which is a must-have really for any Conjuration build, I'd say right now, because you can get a huge amount of extra Conjuration damage. The cooldowns or the mana cost reduction is super useful. Extra attack speed for free and Conjuration damage. You can get more max life and that mana later on if you need it. Again, more Conjuration damage, just loads of it. And then I've put in Conjurer here. This just gives you a really quite phenomenal amount of Conjuration damage. You can see I've got 1,229.6% at a level 100 glyph. I've got one more node, actually two more nodes I can take still. So that would give me another 125%. And then that's further scaled by the 28.5% at the bottom here. And I can confirm that that works. And it also gives us 20% increased duration. So this is just excellent here. And all of the clusters will be taken here eventually once all of the points are available. One note, one glyph I did try using, but it just doesn't seem to work right now, is Invocation, which is a shame because it's focused at Conjurations. The crit damage for Conjurations probably does work, and the damage reduction, but the legendary bonus here is exactly the same, 28.5% multiplicative Conjuration skills damage. It's exactly the same as the Conjurer one, but when I put Invocation on, it does not scale anything that I can see. It does not scale the Conjuration damage in the stats panel, and when I used it, it just seemed extremely weak compared to everything else. So I have a feeling that that legendary bonus either is not working when this one's on, or if I take this off, it still doesn't seem to stack it. It may just not be working at all. So that's what it seems like to me at the moment anyway, so we'll have to see. Maybe that's bugged and maybe that will be fixed some point, and then maybe that would be better later on. But for now, I've avoided that one. So that's the Paragon board. There will be a planner for it. It'll be in the descriptions. Have a look for that. And let's go and have a quick look at the stats panel, just to run down the final stats of this final build. So we've got 46.8 thousand attack power just standing still. We've got our 1,000 cap armor. We've got just over 4,000 life, 1,600 intelligence. The rest of the stats are big enough generally to get the all of the activations, except there are a couple up here that we haven't quite activated yet. We could probably adjust the boards to achieve this, but once we've got all the rest of our Paragon points, we would be able to get the extra points required to activate this node here. I think that might be the only one. Oh, there's a couple over here, but there's not many. It's only the willpower at this point, and they will be activated through going through the board with the extra 74 Paragon points we can get. And then if we go into the stats panel, we've got all of our resistances capped up to where they can be. If you had a greater affix maximum resistance to all here, they would all be capped at 85. We've got 62.2% attack speed by default. When we've got Enlightenment key passive on, that takes us up to 80%. And when we put a Elixir Advantage 2 on, that takes us up another 15%. So that takes us to 97.2%. If we had a better Fist of Fate or greater affix on attack speed here, that would cap us at 100% without the need for the Andariels. And I can confirm that Enlightenment does affect attack speed cap 1, not 2. So there's no point taking that if you're already at 100% attack speed, since that's one of the main reasons for going there. Because we've got 54% crit chance on the Air of Perdition, and we've got so much crit chance on the Ring of Starless Skies, and a bit over here on Fist of Fate and so forth, we have achieved 100% crit chance by default all the time with our dexterity. And because we've got the destruction node in, you can just see the vast amounts of crit strike damage we get for free here, and this could go up just a slight bit more as well once we take all the crit damage nodes in that board and put that extra 5 dexterity in there. So this will go over 2,000% overall, I think, in the end. Our vulnerable damage is well over 2,300% because we've got the Shredding Blades aspects in. We've got the Frigid Fate nodes, which can get another 7% multiplicative damage still that I saw. We've got extra vulnerable in the gems here, and we've got the Exploit Glyph. So this is just... And we can also scale the Exploit Glyph quite a lot as well with extra Paragon points. So this could probably go well into 2,500 to 3,000 range. This is what I was talking about, the Enchanter Glyph. It makes your all damage go, additive go pretty mental. So we're at 1,400. There's at least 4 or 5 intelligence nodes to get still. So that would give us at least 200 base scaled up. So that would probably put us in the range of 1,700 to 2,000 all damage as well. And that affects everything. These will all pretty much be applied to everything all the time, except this one won't apply to any burning dot damage, but these will. Damage with fire is a bit low right now, but that could be scaled up if you wanted to put in non-physical damage nodes, and there are still some non-physical damage nodes to gain. You want to get this up to 300% damage with cold, because then that would give your Frigid Fate node your full 60%. There are nodes left in the Paragon boards to get to achieve this, and your damage with lightning matches. When Enlightenment activates, it adds all of 3 of these together and makes all 3 of them all collectively what they would be. So the more of these all collectively you got, the more your damage with fire will be during that Enlightenment phase. So you could probably get up to about 1,000% on damage with fire once Enlightenment's active, once you've got all of the non-physical damage nodes activated in the Paragon boards that we're using right now. So that's just another additive to add to the list here. And going down, we've got a bit of damage with burning. This was a lot higher while leveling, but we've curved that out for fire now and other methods of scaling the damage, which is less conditional to burning. So that's why we've done that. Damage with pyromancy, that just comes from the passive nodes. That just affects anything with fire. Your damage with conjuration is well over 2,000%, and this doesn't include your Hydra damage that's on anything. So at the moment we have got some Hydra damage on the staff, and as I said before, I'd probably want to replace this with vulnerable damage. This could easily scale up to about 2,500%. I think once you've got everything in completely, somewhere between 2,200 to 2,500%. So that's pretty nice. We've got the damage versus crowd control on the control glyph, bit of extra damage versus elite. A bit of extra damage versus burned and dazed and such and so forth. So there's loads and loads of additive damage here. It's pretty immense. In terms of damage reduction, you've got the immense amount of damage reduction from the Tyrells. You've got some dot damage reduction, which you can scale further in the Paragon board. Huge amount of damage reduction from elites with the passive on and the nodes in the Burning Instinct Paragon board. A pretty large amount of damage reduction from vulnerable and damage reduction from burning, again from Paragon boards. And we don't take any barrier bonus right now, but you absolutely could. I think there might be one in my passive nodes in my skill tree right now, but you could take more if you wanted. We've got a bit of mana regeneration, but you might not need this with the Starless Skies. Movement speed is not quite capped, but it could be if you've got a greater affix in the movement speed on either of these mythics here. Cooldown reduction is not the greatest, but we'd be looking to get a greater affix on your Tower of Shards at least. So that would help get you up to nearest towards 30. Especially if you could masterwork 3 times. Your lucky hit could go well above 200% with a greater affix in lucky hit chance on Fist of Fate, but at the moment we've got 114. And you've got lucky hit on all your crowd controls and 48.1% on lucky hit freeze. So that's pretty much a rundown of the character in depth. If you've got any questions about the build, please leave some comments in the description. I'm absolutely open to ideas. This is a rough around the edges build I've thrown together in a day. It could be pushed further. I'm sure there's probably ways of improving it. So yeah, guys, throw out any ideas if you've had a chance to play around with stuff. And I can't imagine this build will change too much before next season. So this build should be good to go for Season 6. There isn't anything here that's wildly broken. It may even get buffed. And I look forward to building it in Season 6 and having a laugh. I will absolutely be leveling up on Hydra because it is with Familiar, because it is absolutely insane for leveling on. It's even better than Firewall Hydra was last season, and it's just even easier to work with. So keep your eyes open for that. We'll be getting a guide out for that at some point as well. And yeah, I suppose now we'll get into some boss demonstrations, guys. Okay, guys, we're going to go and do a Tormented Varshan. We're going to use Elixir of Advantage Tier 2 here for the attack speed and lucky hit chance. So we're going to go ahead and summon up our Tormented Varshan. And all we're going to do is we're going to start planting our Hydras down. We're just going to start mashing all of our conjurations. And you'll see the Tormented Varshan will be crowd controlled and then just be dead. And that is Tormented Varshan. Okay, guys, we're going to go and do a Tormented Grigoire now. We've got our Elixir Advantage level 2 on for the attack speed and lucky hit chance. So we're going to go ahead and spawn him up. We're going to go hug the wall over here just to wait for the squares to come up. And then as they disappear, we're going to walk into him. We're going to plant down our Hydras in preparation. And then the second he spawns, we're just going to start casting all our skills. And he'll probably crowd control pretty fast. And once he does, he'll just melt, as you can see. And there we go. So that, guys, is Tormented Grigoire. Okay, guys, we're going to go and do a Tormented Tzir now. We've got our Elixir level 2 advantage on, so we've got the extra attack speed and lucky hit chance. So we're going to go and spawn him up. We're going to place our Hydras down in preparation. And once he spawns, we're just going to start summoning up all our conjurations, and he should melt pretty fast. We'll start spawning these up, get ice armor on, teleport, and just get the extra lightning damage proc. And there we go. Once he's crowd controlled, he just absolutely melts. Okay, guys, we're going to go do a Tormented Beast in the Ice. We've got our Elixir of Advantage level 2 on for the attack speed and lucky hit chance. So we're going to go ahead and spawn him up. We're going to get our Hydras set in advance. And the aim here is to kill him as fast as humanly possible so that we don't have to deal with any of his mechanics. And we should get him down pretty quickly here. Okay, he did manage to get up just in time, so we may have to deal with one set of mechanics here. That's okay. Second he's able to be attacked again, he will die. And there we go. Beast in the Ice. Okay, guys, we're going to go do a Tormented Duriel now. We've got our Elixir Advantage level 2 on for the attack speed and lucky hit chance. So we're going to go ahead and spawn him up. We're going to get our Hydras in preparation. And then as he spawns up, we're just going to start casting our conjurations and our ice armor. And he should crowd control pretty quickly. And once he does, that should be pretty much the end of him. So as you can see, his crowd control bar is flying up. And he may even die before he gets crowd controlled in this instance. Oh no, he crowd controlled just in time. Either way, he's dead. So that, guys, is Tormented Duriel. Okay, guys, we're going to go and do a Tormented Andariel now. We've got our Elixir Advantage 2 on for our attack speed and lucky hit chance. We're going to go ahead and summon her up. What we're going to do is we're going to summon up our Hydra heads, and then once she's spawned, we're going to just start casting all our skills. And the aim is to try and kill her pretty much so that we only have to do one set of effigies, which will be now. And then we'll just quickly fling around and destroy those, and then she just dies. And as you can see, your Hydras and everything else pretty much just did the work for you. So that, guys, is Tormented Andariel. Okay, guys, I'm going to demonstrate a reasonably high pit here on this Hydra of Perdition build. We're going to go and do a tier 85, but just to demonstrate, I have done a tier 88. I very nearly did a tier 89. If I had better gear and more Paragon points, this would absolutely be attainable. We're going to do an 85 to demonstrate the build in action with a little bit of ease there. So we're going to open this up. We've got an Elixir of Advantage 2 on for the attack speed and lucky hit chance, and we're going to enter the pit here. And we're just going to focus on the elites, as we normally do, to get through to the boss as quickly as possible. And then with the aim of completing the boss before the time is up. So we're just going to seek out the elites here. And there's 3 over here. Preferably the groups of elites, the 3s, they're better than the single ones. There is a resistance mob over here, so we'll have to deal with these first. As you'll see, there's quite a lot of AoE damage on this build compared to the one last season. There were some Winter Glass builds last season which did eat similar things, but we are using some of the new mechanics available to us here, and items to go with them. So we're just going to group these together, and they will just burn down. Try not to get crowd controlled too much. Right, so they're dead. Let's move on. Seek out the next group of elites. Which are over here. And if we're lucky, we're aiming for these without the resistance mobs on them, so we can just focus on killing them, and then any trash mobs that die with them is a bonus. So we're just going to constant cast our Hydras because they attack a lot quicker this way, which is one of the reasons we haven't taken the Serpentine aspect. And they'll just slowly but surely burn down, and that will speed up over time as the Hydras attack more, so they're dead. So we'll move on to the next ones. Another 3 over here. Again, I think we're lucky here. I don't think we've got a resistance mob in range. So that means we can just focus on these. There's not too many mobs around them either. As you can see, there's an awful lot of frozen orbs going off. Okay, so they're dead, so we'll move on to the next ones. Another group, and if we're lucky, there won't be a resistance mob on these ones either. Walls are not your friend on this build because they just block all the projectiles. You've just got to be wary of that. Try and work around them. But if you can get the freeze up time like we've got here, they should just be frozen most of the time, or crowd controlled in some form. There you go, they're dead. So we'll move on to the next ones. There's a singular one here. These are generally not as good as the groups, but if you can get them down fast enough, they do give a nice little bump to the bar towards the boss. Just got to be wary they hit harder, and they're a lot tankier, and they have a barrier mechanic on them, so they can take a little bit more of a beating, but once you get going on them, they do go down. So we'll move on. There's a resistance mob there. We can just skip him, go to the next area. So I'll come over here, look for the next set of elites. Over here, so we'll just jump on him. That's actually a singular elite again. Doesn't look like there's a resistance mob in range right now, so we can just hopefully go all in on him and get him down before one can get nearby. That's the aim. Try and stay on top of him. And he's frozen, so if he's frozen, he'll take a lot more damage from you than he would otherwise, so he's dead already, I think. So that, yeah, so we can move on to the next one. That's a group over here. We will need to deal with this resistance mob first. There's normally 2. I can only see 1 right now though, so maybe the other one's out of range. Looks like he is. So that's ideal. We can just deal with these here then. Just got to be careful of that fire enchant there. It's going down pretty fast. Deal with the vampiric next, otherwise he'll just lifesteal his way back up to life, which is not what we want. Dead, and then we'll do with the multi-shot one. Cool, and then we'll move on to the next one. We don't need the Lilith Shrine, we're at 100% crit chance anyway. Okay, we've got a couple of resistance mobs up here, so let's deal with those. And once they're dead, we're going to jump straight in on this elite over here. And again, if we can keep them permanently frozen, they will take a lot more damage from all the various different mechanics we've got for crowd control and frozen enemies and so forth. So as you can see here, demonstration as well. We've got the Necro's Decrepify constantly casting every 1 to 1.2 seconds here, so that gives us a permanent application of slow, a permanent application of lucky hit stun, and a permanent application of lucky hit execute to every enemy it hits. It also reduces their damage by 20%, so that's nice for, well, essentially becoming more tanky against anything around you in the near vicinity. And it's just an all-round useful skill, and we use that to help activate our favour for our Warcry, Barbarian Warcry rune, which is giving us an extra 25% damage and some extra movement speed, which is always nice as well. So you can see that the Decrepify is proccing around us pretty regularly. You can see the circle coming up. So we're going to burn down these elites here. Got increased health, so he's got a little bit more beating in here, and there's a resistance mob nearby. That would explain why he's still alive. I think we got him, but I'm not entirely sure. I think he just teleported away maybe. There's another group down here, so we'll deal with these. Put all on top of each other. This is what you ideally want. You want all of the elites right directly on top of each other where you can freeze them. Because then you can hurt them all with everything all at the same time. And you'll get them down a lot quicker if you do this. Especially if they're all frozen on top of one another. Let's deal with the frozen one over here. Let's move on to the next elites. We've got 2 over here. 3 over here, in fact. So deal with these 2 here first. Okay, he's moved in nearer to us, so we can just get in the middle of them and try and hit all 3 at the same time. As you can see, every time they get frozen, they take a big burst of damage. That's 2. And 3. Okay, so we move on. Group over here, do these. Make sure we're not standing directly in the chilled winds. This is going to be burning down. That's 2, 3. Okay, let's move on. So we probably need to do a couple more groups and then we'll be done. So there's one over here, one singular one here. This one could be interesting because we've got those resistance mobs just over there, but they haven't moved over to us just yet. So if we're lucky, we'll kill this guy before they do decide to come this way. I think they might, oh no, they did come over this way. I think they might have got distracted by our conjurations there for a moment. But they will go down. And once they do, this elite will start to take a lot more damage again. Okay, that's the lieutenant. Where's he gone? Okay, I think he's dead. So now, okay, there's a group over here. This will probably be enough to push us over the edge, hopefully. Get these 3 down. This isn't my fastest run at an 85. I think we finished one with about 5 or 6 minutes left, but it was just a bit of a clearer run than this one, I think. That's 2. Yeah, that's the 3rd one, I was going to say. I thought I only killed 2. Get that this will push. This will definitely unlock the boss. Fine. Right, we're on to the boss. Doesn't matter too much what the boss is on this build. Okay, it's the Sea Hag, so that's not too bad. So we're just going to place. So we're just going to keep casting our Hydras. You'll crowd control super duper fast. And you'll do all 3 stages of crowd control super duper fast. And at this point, that will, for the most part, burn most of our HP down. I'll probably have to play a couple of mechanics afterwards. As you can see, the damage is kicking in. So this will be stage 3. And we've got a little bit of gameplay left to play. So we've got about 2/3 of life down in that quick burst because of the crowd control. We will get a 4th crowd control off on her if we kept going, but we may kill her beforehand on this difficulty. If we had a better Fist of Fate, we would definitely crowd control her even quicker. But we don't have a... don't currently have a Great Seraphic's Lucky Hit Fist of Fate on this character. Just using the basic one we got from the little goblin in Kyovashad, and there you go. There's the boss. So we did that with about just over 5 minutes left, so just under 10 minutes for a tier 85 pit. I've done a tier 88, very nearly did a tier 89. This build will absolutely be able to do tier 90 plus.